I'm lurking in the wings over here. Here I go. Right. Yeah, they're trying to get me dressed here. Anyway, I'm really glad to be here, and it's such a lovely day. The whole week has been beautiful. I arrived in Oslo on Monday evening, and people assure me that the weather is always like this in Norway. It's really beautiful. So I'm going to continue the discussion on measuring the value of library services and collections. And in light of your talk, Liv, I added a few things at the last minute that may explain some of the differences, or some of the differences we expect to see. So I added a few things there, and I'd be glad to talk about any of those things as well. So I had the English abstract and some whispering in my ear, so I think I got the main thing. I wanted to start though, and talk a little bit about me, just so you know who I am and where I'm coming from. I was last year lived in Helsinki, so I spent the whole academic year last year in Finland as the Fulbright Nokia Distinguished Chair in Information and Communications Technologies. I think it's a long title, but it was a great opportunity. I had a chance to work with people in Nokia, but I was based at Hanken School of Economics, so worked with my colleagues who I've known for a long time there at Hanken School of Economics in the Information Systems Department. There is a group there that follows open access publishing and has for many years. Bo Krister Bjork, Turid Hedlund, Mikael Laakso, and so that group, it was great to be able to work with them and also to be based in Finland. And I also worked with the national consortium there, and again have known the people there for a long time at the FiniLib National Consortium, who they were in the middle of negotiating all of their national licenses for journals, so that was an interesting time to just sort of observe, but also they helped me distribute my survey and my research. They helped me with research, so it was good. And also colleagues at University of Tampere Information School and folks around. So this is a real collaborative effort, and I'm going to talk about some of the work I was doing there. And yes, it would have made a lot more sense for me to come to Norway when I was living in Finland. I tried to, it didn't work out. It's something I've always wanted to do, so I was really pleased when I got the invitation. And I said, yeah, I hate to tell you, I am back in the States, but the invitation still stands, so I'm glad it did. I'm glad to be here. So where I came from now, and my home base is in Tennessee, the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And if you have not been to Tennessee, we're southeast portion of the United States. I'm not from there originally. People ask me how does it feel to live in the South, and I say it's the furthest north I have ever lived, because I am from Southern California and then lived for many years in Honolulu, Hawaii. So we moved, it's been a long time now, 1994 we made that 5,000-mile trek from here in the ocean to Tennessee, and so I have made my intellectual and home there since then. So a few pictures from the campus. We're on the Tennessee River. It's not quite as beautiful as there, but it's nice. We're in the Appalachian Mountains. So Knoxville is way to the it's way over here. It's way in the east part of Tennessee, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, which compared to Norway's mountains are hills. You know, they're not mountains, but they're as good as it gets in that part of the country. I brought this picture because I thought you might be interested in the main library at the University of Tennessee campus. I'm in the library school. I'm in the information science department, but we do a lot of projects with the main library there and with the librarians, plus they employ a lot of our graduates. And some of the things I'm talking about today have been in collaboration, and they have this lovely ziggurat-shaped building that's kind of the center of the campus. That's the main library, and it's kind of a centralized library system at Tennessee, but they also have in the hospital and the health sciences center, there is a library, a quite wonderful library that serves medical students, the physicians, the nurses, as well as patients, and serving the patients and the families. It's not like giving novels for the patients to read, it's medical research, but for novices, and that's something new that they just took on, so that's kind of interesting. And then there's also an agriculture library and a art library and a law library. So there's one main that serves most of the campus, it serves everybody, but then there are some specialized libraries involved in that. So you may not know a lot about Tennessee, but I think there is one thing that everybody knows about Tennessee, and that is the music. And so we are in the Far East, and that's very important for connoisseurs of music, because that means old-timey and bluegrass. So if you were in the west part, in Memphis, it would be blues. And if you were in the center part, which is Nashville, it would be country and western. So people, the regional differences in music are quite strong, and people are very passionate about that kind. So I've learned that since I moved there, so that's kind of fun. Part of the Fulbright duties is to represent the United States across across Europe, actually. I was able to travel quite a bit. But one of the talks I was asked to do in Finland was to teach secondary school teachers of English. And they said, don't do your research, do something cultural. So I talked about the history of music in Tennessee. So that's why I learned a lot. When I was in Finland, I studied Tennessee music, so I learned a lot about it. It was kind of fun. Anyway, okay, so enough about that. So we're here to talk about value. And value of libraries is something that I've been working on a long time, and I think it's dear to all of our hearts because we used to assume it. You used to be, and all of us, we assume that our collections, our buildings, our educational materials, our portals, our services, everything we do has value to our constituents. Value to students, if you're in an academic setting, value to researchers, value to teachers, and it's something we've long assumed. It's only been fairly recently, and it very much corresponds to the rise of digital resources and competition for content, that we have felt the need in the library community to demonstrate value. It's something that we know, but having to show others has something that is important all over the world now. I hear people, they replicate the studies and they're doing this kind of thing because it's something that they feel the need to do. But we need to remember that measuring value isn't only about I'm good and here's why, right? Showing people, yeah, we have value. It's also about making informed and important choices. Because the library today has more choices than ever before. And after lunch, I'm going to talk about research data services. If you decide to get actively involved in research data services, that's a choice. And that may be something extra, and you hire lots of extra staff to do it. But in most cases, it's a choice that you're going to do that instead of something else. So measuring value needs to be not just thought of the whole library. It really needs to be looked at in terms of specific collections, specific services, and specific things, you know, which, if I can't do everything, which things have more value to my constituents? Which is more value to my institution, and what choices can I make? So when you think about value, think about it again in small pieces of value of a particular service or particular kind of collection, and also think of it in terms of not only demonstrating to funders and to others that you're good, that you have value, but also think of it in terms of making decisions of increasing your value or providing services that are more valuable. So with that said, the focus on this morning is going to be on looking at some methodology and definitions of value, kind of carrying on and expanding from looking at different kinds of methods as well as what we've heard about this morning. I'm going to give you some examples from the Live Value project, which is the latest a project that we have just finished, but it carries on quite a bit. And I will also give you some examples from the work that I was doing in Finland. My research project there was to look at, do a nationwide reading survey, looking at the value of reading of researchers, scholars in the country. And I'll give you, the examples I use will be from that mostly, rather than the earlier things in the UK and US and in Australia and other places. But I'll give you some examples from both, so you can see. Some of the differences that were described, we need, I can address those as well, what might be reasons for differences. And I can think probably about 5 reasons, so remind me to come back. So first of all, the Live Value project that a lot of this work started is something that I worked for a long time on. The website is still available, and the bibliography there. And it was a big project with lots of partners, funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, to look at values, outcomes, and return on investment of academic libraries in particular. Our partners were the Association of Research Libraries, and they have the website there. You are familiar with Megan Oakleaf's work. Megan works with the Association of College and Research Libraries. So ACRL has lots of different sizes. It's like ARL, it's Canada and the US, but they have everything from really small libraries of 2-year college libraries all the way up to the big ones. ARL is just the research library. So our work is biased toward and focused toward the major research universities. University of Tennessee, Syracuse University was a partner. Megan is at Syracuse, and she worked some with us, but Bruce Kingma, who's an economist, and in the I-School at Syracuse is the main one who worked with us, so we wanted to have the perspective of an economist. University of Illinois also worked with us, and you will see some of their work. I'll mention some of that. And then what Liv was talking about was the JISC project that in the UK. So they were also funding partner, and we looked at 6 research universities in the UK with the assistance of JISC. So it was 3 countries, Canada, US, UK involved, but we have done some work in other countries as well. So again, you can find the Live Value project and more about it. But the main thing to remember, I think, about Live Value is that the purpose was methodological. So I'm going to give you lots of findings, but think of them as examples, because the methodology is what really is key here. So we wanted to look across institutions and somewhat across countries to test lots of different ways to measure, and some of them work better than others. And so I'll try to be candid with you about which ones I think work better than others. But the idea was we put the methods out there so people could see and use and adapt and make decisions on their own. And again, for multiple kinds of services, we know that measuring the value of an entire library is not a good idea. You really have to break it down, as I mentioned. And then the other thing is value is going to be dependent on the stakeholder group. So the value to students is quite different from the value to researchers or academic staff. And so the idea of what are the best ways to measure, multiple ways to measure multiple values for multiple users. And that's why it was a big kind of complex project. And so we have published a lot of the results, and you can find them. And if you have trouble finding anything, let me know. So part of Live Value was this idea of working in teams, because when you're trying to test lots of different things, it was important to have different teams. So we had an ebook collection, ebook team, which was based at the University of Illinois, and they have published quite a bit about their results. We had a special collections that was in the library at the University of Tennessee, as was the Information Commons, so the space, the value of space. I was the head of the collections and reading team, so that's, most of my examples will come from that, but the methods kind of work for any of these. At the heart of all of those is the value and return on investment. So that informed all of these teams in terms of value and return on investment. I should have mentioned another partner. The comprehensive team was based at Bryant University, one you may not know, but a smaller, not an ARL library, a smaller university in Rhode Island. So we had another partner there. So the idea is that that we were all looking at value and kind of and testing the same methods and some different methods there too. And again, the bibliography has all of those. So I'm going to give you some results. As I said, most of my examples are going to come from this, but I'd be glad to talk about the others, and a lot of them have been published. The other examples I'm going to give you come from, as I mentioned, from the work I was doing in Finland last academic year, and we are just getting ready to publish a lot of this, so it has not come out yet. We're waiting, and we have two articles submitted. We're waiting for the peer review process, so it should be out soon, I hope. Again, it was looking at reading values, very similar to the UK study and the other parts of lived values. So just taking that forward and into the context of Finland. As part of that, we look at the role of the library. One thing that's important to remember when I'm talking about the value of reading or access to articles and other scholarly materials, that I'm talking about in people's work life. What is the value of access to information for work? And so when I'm talking about reading patterns and things, I'm talking about in work. I'm not asking them, how much they use social media in their personal life. I'm talking about for work, how much do you use social media, et cetera, and other things. So, the other thing that's important to remember, that we look at readings from all sources, as you heard this morning, that so that you can compare. It's one thing to look at the value of the library in a vacuum. Are we good? Are we doing things right? Yet people always say, yes, yes, we love you, or whatever. But what is your competition? What else are people doing, and how does that change over time? And that is really, really crucial, because there's a whole lot more competition in published collections now. So what's the competition, and where is your role within that context? So we'll look at that. As you know, this replicates stuff I've been doing for a long time. So my one-time and long-time colleague and mentor, Donald King, started doing these surveys in nationwide in the U.S. in 1977, before I was working with him. But then when we joined forces, we had the advantage of being able to test changes over time, and what a time it has been in terms of journal reading between 77 and now. Huge changes, but so we look at that. So this replicates. So sometimes the questions are the way they are because we're trying to look at the same thing over a long period of time. And in Finland, we had done a study of e-reading in 2007, so a subset of our readings, not the print, not from reading from print. And so we've got some comparison there over about a 10-year period in the same country with the same population, not the same individuals necessarily, but the same methodology. Okay. So those are where the examples come from. Since a lot of this is a methodology talk, I'm going to give you a lot of introduction, so bear with me here. But I think when we think about value, we need to think about the different ways to measure value. When we talk about multiple methods, there's also multiple kinds of value. And you have to make a decision in your context which kinds of value are relevant or important. The first kind of value is what I call implied value or implicit value. And I noticed that the International Standards Organization standard calls it inferred value. So I'm saying evidence implies, and they're saying the people infer the value, so whether it's implied or inferred, the idea is that this is the assumption that because people use our materials, they have value. Value is implied. So libraries have done this for decades. This is the main thing we've done. We used to count, and we probably still do, how many people come into the building. So we assume because they come into the building, there is value to them coming. So that's a kind of implicit value. Or we used to measure, we still measure circulation. How many things went in and out. So we look at circulation, we say, okay, the people are using our materials, therefore it must be valuable to them. Now downloads are from collections are the main way of this implicit. People download materials, therefore they must be using them, therefore must have value. So libraries, for years have done this implicit value. Another kind of measure is explicit value. That is a lot of times asking somebody, what did you do with the things you downloaded? How did it help? What were the outcomes? Are you going to cite it? Are you going to talk about it in a class? What actually were the outcomes? So that's explicit. That's usually asking people, how did it influence your life? And then there are derived values. Those are mostly using economic kinds of techniques to look at things like how does the library contribute to the income generating part of the institution. And I'm going to talk about some of those. Those can be very controversial, so we'll talk about the negatives as well as the positives. But things like return on investment, that I'm really going to focus on return on investment, but there are other things like contingent valuation, that is, what would your life be if you didn't have the library? I always thought the best way to measure contingent valuation would be to completely shut down the library for a week and see what, listen to people scream, but that's probably not possible. But also what I call contributions to success, so I'll talk about some of those. And just a bit about implicit value, because again, you're very good at this. And so the Live Value project was to go beyond implicit value. That was really our goal, because we know libraries can do that. Libraries, in terms of downloads, have been really good at implicit value for the last 15 years or so, since Project Counter standards have come out. So it's hard for me to imagine that it's actually been that long, but it's been close to 15 years now. And this, of course, as you know, is allowed us to measure with some confidence the downloads from a variety of subscriptions to platforms and journal platforms. And that really escalated the value, the counting of use, or at least of downloads in libraries, and libraries have done that a lot now. I just want to give you one illustration of what some of the problems with implied or implicit value, particularly with downloads. So this is from the University of Tennessee, and this was from 4 to 10, and this was the number of downloads. And they used this a lot. Say, wow, we're being down, our collections have doubled in size. Of course, as Counter came in, there were more and more things that were available to count. So we'll discount the fact that the numbers are a little suspect. But I mean, this is a very easy to understand. Even administrators, understand this. Okay, people are using the collections a lot. Therefore, implied value. All the millions we're spending on this are really paying off because people are using it, which is actually true. However, starting in 10-11, they began to go down a little. Does that mean that the value of the library has diminished? You don't want to send that message. And many libraries have seen a settling off or a slight decrease. This happened with circulation years before this, and it has happened with downloads. So be careful in the message. The other one send a great message. Does this send a message that the value is decreased? No, because what implied value doesn't show is it doesn't show what people are doing with that. And a lot of this use may be kind of low value, but we didn't want to say that when we were using that as our main measure. Students downloading 50 things and reading one of them or something. So these, you just be a little careful with those. So again, what we are trying to do is go beyond the implied value. What we really want to do is help people find ways to show more explicit and derived value. That is more downstream value. And again, in the public library setting, somebody mentioned in Norway there's been some work in public libraries. Public libraries have been pretty good about this explicit and derived value, showing things like the economic value to the community of having information resources and things like that. So public libraries have done it quite a bit, but academic libraries had not, and special libraries had not done those kinds of things too much. So the real gold standard, or the real downstream, is this idea of how the institution, the community is really made better by the fact that people have access to services and information. So I'm not going to talk too much that far downstream, but that's kind of what the goal is. And again, public libraries have done it. So I'm going to talk about these four things. I'm going to talk about exchange value, I'm going to talk about use value, and I'll define these in a minute, and return on investment and supporting success. So these two are the derived values, and these two are the explicit values. So these are the four that we'll look at. Okay, so you've heard this actually this morning about two types of value. I go back to Fritz Machlup, talking about an economist who was quite active in the 60s and 70s, who described two types of value in the information context. Fritz Machlup was the mentor of Don King, my mentor. So the mentor of my mentor. So maybe my grandfather, right? Okay, so, but he talked about these two kinds of value, and this has informed the work that we've done for a long, long time. And the first is purchase or exchange value, and I mentioned I'm going to talk about exchange value. That idea is what an individual is willing to pay in terms of money or time, that people demonstrate that something is of value to them because they spend their time. So you're here. That's a demonstration of that you believe it's of value to you. So that's one kind of value. And I must mention that in the information world, we're almost always talking about exchange value now. People's willingness to pay for work-related, end users' willingness to pay for work-related information has decreased from 1977 to now. I mean, people are willing to pay all sorts of money for entertainment. Have you noticed that? Movies or whatever, but internet. But for work-related information, the willingness to pay has actually decreased. And one of the reasons is because the library has been so good at that. The libraries have paid for it. My institution pays for it. I'm not going to pay for it. So it's almost always exchange value. It's measuring time spent interacting with information provided by the library, information services, etc. The other kind of value is use value, and so I am going to talk about that. That's a bit more profound. It's a bit more downstream. It's this idea of outcomes. Sometimes it's called outcomes. So this idea of the favorable consequences that occur because I was exposed to a class, an instructional session at the library, or I had access to information resources. That's what happened to my work because of that. And our group, again, I'm talking about just the scholars and access to information, but one of our groups was looking at undergraduate students and how does the library as place, the physical space, how does that influence student retention? Because a lot of universities in the U.S. have this problem with students who drop out. And so, so they did look at that. But that was not the group I was in. So Megan Oakleaf has done some of that, as well as a group at University of Tennessee. Other ways to look at explicit value. Bruce Kingman at Syracuse, as I mentioned, was on our team, and he defined value as private value or economic, that is the value to an individual. What is the value to me as a user, to a person, to an individual person. And then he said that you take that up, so you need to talk to people. You need to talk about to students, to faculty, to researchers, to find out the value to them, which could be a kind of outcomes value. But then you need to take that the next step to look at the social or public value, the overall value to the institution. So what is the value by having the library there to the institution? Maybe better retention. It may be attracting high quality scholars to come because they've got good library services, that kind of thing. And then he talked about something else that I don't see very many people talk about, environmental value. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Libraries have made a huge investment, and we have spent a lot of time in training and everything else in terms of going digital, right? Getting rid of a lot of print subscriptions and really focusing on digital services a variety of times. And he said we need to look at that in terms of environmental value. So I'll show you some of that. And he liked to say libraries have gone green, and they didn't even realize it, in the sense that, you're not bringing in all this paper, you're not making people drive or come or whatever. So I'll talk about that. One other category of types of value that you might be, some of you, are you familiar with in 2014, the International Standards Organization? Okay. Yeah, they came out with this was the same time that we were working, and we influenced each other. Procedures for assessing the impact. They talk about impact of libraries rather than value. By the way, Fritz Machloff hated the word impact used in this way, so I have to laugh whenever I see that. I laugh because I remember Don telling me a story. If I spill this water, but he said, Fritz Machloff said, impact, that's impact. We're talking about value. Okay, so sorry if anyway, but they're talking about impact, okay. So their categories are pretty much the same. So they say inferred, we talk about implied. They talk about solicited, I'm going to talk about qualitative, or getting stories, or interviews, focus groups, open-ended comments, those are kind of solicited. You ask people for their stories. Observed, okay, and then combining methods, which is what I will tell you right now is what I always recommend. One method doesn't really do it, and then they also talk about this, what I call derived, the assessing the economics. So very similar. If you get IFLA journal, if you see the IFLA journal, the latest issue has a really good explanation of this standard. I thought, oh my gosh, talk about timing right before. So the latest issue of IFLA describes that and talks a lot about our work and a lot about Megan Oakley's work. Okay, so let me then talk about the work, and I'm going to give you examples of our findings, and I wasn't sure about how much methods, how much findings, so I'm just kind of gave you both. To get to beyond that implied value, to look at more downstream values, we have for many years used 4 types of questions in a surveys, and then sometimes follow-up interviews. And I think it's important to understand this when I give you the findings. So the kinds of questions, and I think that this is very much what you heard about earlier, is first thing we do is ask demographic. That's kind of a no-brainer, but it's crucial because we have found over time, and it still holds true, and I think this is one of the reasons the findings differ, is there's huge differences based on subject discipline. You know that, especially if you're in a special library where you're dealing with a particular subject group. This has held true, it has ever been, and probably ever will be, that the types of materials valued, the types of services valued, the amount of reading varies by subject discipline, more predictable than anything else. Okay. At one end, reading the most articles are medical folks with clinical duties. They read a lot. They don't spend much time on any article, but they read a lot. On the other end, and also doctoral students, you know, they're way over there on the high reading. At the other end are in terms of articles, are humanities, people in the humanities. They read other things, but not so much articles. So subject discipline is huge. The other thing, and I mentioned doctoral students, the other thing is work role. So, you know, undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty members, whether they teach more or do more research, all of these kinds of things make a big difference. So those things are the biggest predictors. Everybody always wants to know about age, so we ask age. Some things differ, some things don't. I can talk about those if you're interested. Not as important as the other things, but still some important differences. And then we quit asking gender, because still, sadly or not, subject discipline is a self-selector for differences in gender. Still, but anyway. So if we normalize within a discipline for gender, we don't find differences. If you don't normalize within a discipline, you find differences by gender, but then you realize, oh, it's because there is an imbalance. The engineers are still highly male. So we don't ask that, but we ask the other things. Here, let me back up, I'm sorry. Recollection questions, we do ask a few things. We ask people to remember things, but very little. We're dealing with self-reported. Whenever you solicit information, as ISO says, remember it's what people think they do, or remember they do. So here is a limitation. We ask people what they do, what they remember that they do, what they think they do. And sometimes that's distinction is quite important. But so we try to make this better. We try to minimize this. So we ask, how much did you read in the last month? How many articles did you read in the last month? How many book chapters? So even a month, but a month, I wouldn't want to go beyond a month. So we ask a month. If I ask you, how many articles did you read in the last year? You know, the longer it goes, the more error there is. Okay. So we're trying to minimize the error, try to make the recollection better. But remember, this is what they say or what they remember. Don't take it as, you know, gospel truth. It's gospel truth about what they think. It is not truth about necessarily exactly what they do. Okay, so we minimize, we ask a few of those. We really focus on critical incident, as you heard. That is, people's memory is much better about something that was recent or important. So some people use critical incident as the important. We use it as the most recent, because we're trying to get good readings, bad readings, short readings, long readings. So we ask for the last thing you read, the last article you read, or the last book or book chapter you read. So the most frequent. The idea is that we'll have a second sample of readings. That's what that comes in here. We have readers. We have information about the individuals. But we also have a sample of readings of the things they read. And I kind of belabor this because it's an important distinction. So by asking about people, I can say things like medical faculty read more articles on average than do humanities faculty. Okay, that's about the readers, the individuals. Or people over 60 read more from print journals than do people under 30, okay, which are both are true. Okay, that's about individuals. But about readings are things like, then we look at their readings and we can say things like, readings done for research are more valuable to purpose, are ranked or rated as more valuable. Okay. Readings from the library are more likely to be for research. ergo, okay, readings from the library of ergo, right? So this is about the readings. And the reason to do that is, remember, no one person does everything the same all the time. Sometimes I read quickly, sometimes I take a long time. Sometimes I read for research, sometimes I read for current awareness. And every instant of reading is different. So you don't want to think too much, you don't want to put too much into, no one person, you don't want to put too much into one person's one-time behavior, so that's why it has to be readings. Because all of us differ depending on the need, and the time, and the purpose. So that's why we make that distinction. So if that, it should become clear. If it's not, be sure to ask me questions. Okay. And then we ask some open-ended comments, which could be open-ended on a survey, can be follow-up. We often ask if they're willing to have a follow-up interview, or we do a focus group sometimes too. And those give us that solicited kind of context, if you will. Okay, so let me get into the meat of this and look at exchange value. So this is, again, results from Finland. You heard some results from the UK. This is 2016-17. The UK was 2011-12. Okay, so some of the differences may just be changes in time. And I added a couple here that might help look at that. So we asked the Finnish researchers, how many things did you read in the last month? Recollection, again, there's nothing magic about the 20. 20 or 22, close, okay? So it's all within that ballpark. So they average, they read about 20 articles. We also asked them about things like books and book chapters and a whole bunch of other things, but for the interest of time, I'm going to focus on the article reading. Okay, so they on average, about 20 article reading. This again is pretty close to what we've seen in others. For some reason, the Australian researchers 6 years ago, they reported reading a lot more. I don't know, maybe they exaggerate, I don't know, but it's average, okay. If we extrapolate that over 12 months, it's 240 article readings. And by the way, that is not a magic number. You can give people a vacation, you could do it times 10, you could do it times 11. It's just that people understand a year a little bit better. And most of our when we look at things, we tend to look in a year, but you can focus here or you can focus here, whichever. We do find that when we've done things at different testing over different times, the people that researchers do actually read on vacation, and sometimes they read even more because they catch up. So I don't think that that's too far off. Now I added to this the differences in disciplines, because I think that that's one of the answers to the differences that you were describing. There is huge variation based on discipline. So remember, overall average 20. But sciences, which we've got medical sciences over here too. Sciences and medical sciences, on the high end. 22, 23, and we've got error bars here, so there's a little bit of difference. But they read the most. They report reading the most articles. Again, this has always been true. This was true 40 years ago, it's true now. Far end, humanities. 8 articles per month. Again, that has been true. So one of the things is, when you look at averages, all of the average, and I average all these together, I can't really, if I'm in a humanities library, I'm going to get way lower numbers, or so that's one variation. If I just threw in this book, I'm not talking too much about book or book chapters, but just to show you how that's the opposite. It's not that humanities people don't read, right? They read a lot more books or book chapters, whereas people in the sciences and medical, it's almost exact opposite slope. The scale is different, but so they are. Again, that's articles, goes up to 30, books, so the relationship. So the reading patterns do vary quite a bit by discipline. So when you are looking at measuring these kinds of things, you do want to make sure that you, especially if you're in a special library, you really want to look at the disciplinary differences. Another part of value is exchange value. And so when we get into the critical incident, we ask for the last thing you read, how much time did you spend reading? So you saw some of this earlier too. And in Finland this time, the average was about 42 minutes per article, and then you can extrapolate 20 readings per month, etc. So 42 minutes on average. Again, there's a variation by discipline, which I didn't bring in here, but that's across all disciplines. It averages about that. In the past, we've seen for the ones who read the most, medical sciences and sciences, they actually spend a little bit less per reading. In other words, there's a sort of magic number in people's minds of how much of their time they can spend on the act of reading and consuming information, and so the ones who read a lot tend to spend a little less per articles. That's part of it. The other part of it, humanities spends a lot more time. The other part of it has to do with structure of the knowledge and the discipline. In a medical article, you go straight to the findings, right, or the counterindications or something. I mean, you can read quick. In a philosophy article, you know, you've got to kind of read the whole thing. So part of it, a lot of it has to do with the structure of the knowledge containers in the discipline. If you add that all up and want to get an exchange value, we've found that it's a month. It's a work month, an 8-hour day, 21 days of 8-hour reading. And that is a big measure of exchange value. It is interacting with information is so important to me. I'm going to spend a whole month of my life doing it. I mean, and that's a lot. Remember, we're talking about people whose main job is not reading. Their main job is research or teaching or, you know, creating new knowledge. But they find that consuming, understanding, reading the works of others is essential to the work that they do. It's part of this standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, the idea of science is I need to know about what others have done to be able to progress. So that's a measure of exchange value. Now, you're from the library, so you want to know, okay, they're reading a lot, but are they reading from us? So this is, you saw 66% in the UK in 2011-12 came from the library, or that they knew came from the library. Okay, so it's probably higher than that, because they may not know. What's happened